Welcome everyone to the IIP Tips and Tricks series, with today's session being DICOM Modality Worklist Issues, sponsored by the Society for Imaging Informatics and Medicine and powered by OTech. This is the first in our series of 3 sessions that we look forward to presenting to you over the first Thursday of each month, going from November, December, and to January. Today's session is sponsored by Herman Oosterwijk, who lists himself as an experienced professional, having extensive knowledge and background with implementing healthcare imaging and IT solutions. In addition, Herman serves as an EHR, PACS, DICOM, and IHE instructor for OTech. Herman, take it away.
Thank you, Brad. So yeah, welcome. I'm excited to share some of my tips and tricks. And in this particular one, we're going to talk about Modality Worklist, because when I talk with my students, that seems to be one of the tricky parts, to making sure that your work list at your modality has all of the information that's needed, not too much and not too little. Okay, so what is the plan for today? And again, thank you for joining us. And one of the things I'd like to emphasize is hopefully this is going to be an interactive. So I'll do a little presentation first, but I encourage you as well to contribute and share some of your experiences with the audience, because that's the most important thing. We can learn from each other. Okay, so what is the agenda? I'm gonna do a little refresher on the DICOM worklist, just a few minutes or so. Make sure we're all on the same page, and I'll talk a little bit about the retrieval keys, filters, issues, and then some questions and discussion. So everybody's muted right now, because otherwise we have a lot of background noise. So Brad will be checking the chat window. So if you have any question or contribution, please enter it in the chat so we can monitor it and answer any questions as needed. Okay, so let's get started. So first of all, a little bit of a refresh on how does DICOM work. DICOM protocol has the DICOM protocol, the way we communicate information, has 3 distinct steps. Number 1, we establish the communication. Number 2, we exchange it, we do it. So first we request what we're going to do, then we do it, and then we release. So if we talk about critical points, let me see my marker. Yeah, so the question always, if something doesn't work, is it at step 1? Or is it at step 2, right? Step 1 or step 2? So do we have a problem with making a connection at all? No, if you have a problem with making a connection at all, we first do a ping, making sure the network connection is working. Then we do a DICOM verification, a DICOM echo, making sure we can talk to the application entity at the SAP at the other side, right? And then if the verification and the ping works and we cannot create a worklist connection, there might be something going on that we talk maybe to the wrong application entity, and maybe it does not support worklist or whatever. But anyway, so assuming that we can make the connection and we get a response back, so we propose to do a worklist to the worklist provider, whether it's in the PACS, RIS, EMR, or wherever the worklist provider is. So assuming we make a connection, and then we do our query. So we said query, we do query, DICOM query, we say, give me the worklist for my CT, meaning all of the studies from 9 to 12 o'clock, for example, modality CT. That's a simple query. And then either it's going to work or it's not going to work. You either might get too little or too much, or hopefully, supposedly, you get exactly what you need. And we'll talk about how to set the filters to get exactly what you need. And then we release the connection. So when we propose a connection, right, from application entity to application entity, step 1, we have these associate control service elements, ACSE, kind of a DICOM trivia. What does ACSE mean? Application Control Service Element, and basically means that you do an associate request. Associate request to make a connection for step 1. With it, you set the presentation context. I say what I want to do. I want to do a DICOM worklist, right? And the transfer syntax, how we encode it. This is kind of irrelevant, because the transfer syntax is really more important when you exchange images, like we want to compress it or send it a different encoding. But for us, for example, we used to do, let's say, maybe a little endian explicit VR. And so after we propose it, we do this cfind command from the DIMC, DICOM Image Master Service Element toolboxes, right? Toolbox, the cfind command to do a query in step 2, and then we release with an associate release request. So that's the thing that you're supposed to see when we'll talk a little bit about troubleshooting later. When you look at a typical query, you see an associate request, accepted or rejected. We do a seek find request with the responses, and then we do a release request with a response back. So that's a little bit about the protocol. So what about the scenario? So here's my work list, right? So basically, how does it fit in the work list? Typically there will be an order coming in if we have a work list provider that is a separate box, or maybe in the packs, or as a broker. But in some cases, actually, it could be in the EMR. The work list could also be in, and actually I see that increasingly happening. A lot of hospitals are rolling out, or have been rolling out, EMR implementations, Epic, Cerners, and so on. And so they provide now also worklist capability. But if you still have one of these architectures where we have a separate broker, a separate worklist provider, a separate processor, separate computer, separate server, or run that application on a different server, then typically the server will be depending on an 807 order coming in. And here's the tricky part, right? The order will be mapped from 807 into DICOM. And that needs to be done in a correct way, because otherwise you might be missing some information. We might be missing accession number, kind of some of the obvious ones, or the procedure description, right? Or we might be missing out on filtering exactly the modality that we're looking for. So modality worklist, and then of course we have our fits in the workflow. We send the images, we do storage commitment and PPS if we have that, look at the images and so on. So we're going to focus on the first part. So how does modality worklist work? Very simple. Modality worklist provides, it's basically a combination of a information model, image service request a procedure, schedule procedure step, left, right on the corner, right here. So it's a combination of an information model. So we always ask in the worklist for the order, and for the order, the different steps, the different procedures and the different steps that have to be performed. And this is not always that obvious when you look at the worklist itself, but basically the information model behind it will be the order, the accession number, that has different procedures, one or more, maybe a CT scanner, right? Or if you have a CT PET, would be PET and CT procedures, and then multiple steps, like for CT with and without contrast, right? So that's the information model. And so we have a cfind that is do a query against that information model, which is supported by the modality worklist provider. And so we have two kind of keys, matching keys, right? Matching keys. So I said, I want you to match in my cfind request all of the names that start, all of the names and the last names that is Smith. Let's see, matching key. And I said, by the way, give me them back. Patient IDs, accession numbers, schedule procedure, and the whole series, right? So this is an example where we do a patient name matching. Typically, most of the application, we do matching on modality. So give me everything that matches modality equals CT or PX or MR or whatever the modality is that we are scheduled for. Okay? And then we have additional matching keys. For example, we could match on CT as well as on date, everything for today, or on time, everything for this morning. Yeah? So that would be the cfind request. So after we do the cfind request, that goes from the SCU, from the service class user, from the client, the modality, to the modality worklist provider. We call it the SCP, service class provider, SCP. So we set up the association, we do the cfind request, and what happens then? We get a set of responses, one or more. So typically there will be multiple responses. Every response, right, has an own status code. So you get a cfind response with the information, right? So Smith, we fill in all of the return keys that we asked for, and then we get a status pending. So that says, okay, back to the ICU. Okay, listen, there's going to be some more. Second one, then pending. Third one, success. So that's really the protocol that we use for the cfind request. By the way, it's the same protocol sequence that we use for a query to the database from a workstation or from the CT scanner if you want to get some prior studies. The only difference is there will be a different information model, but the protocol, the find requests and responses is identical. The difference will be information model, right? So the receiver will create a response with each one pending success. So some of the details, patient is scheduled for procedure, and the information in the worklist are threefold. Number one, demographic information, patient name, ID, birth date, sex, whatever it is, patient weight, depending on the modality. Some modalities want weight, some modalities like contrast allergies, some modalities like pregnancy status, right? Pregnancy status is important for X-ray, not necessarily important for ultrasound, but because if you do OBGYN ultrasound, we know that the person is very likely pregnant, right? So demographic information. And that's actually kind of a little bit trickier to make sure that all of the information that you typically want is part of the worklist, right? Sometimes I get hospitals that say, well, what about, and I came across the like last menstrual date. Oh, is that in there? Oh, so we might have to do some mapping. So patient demographic, and then ordering information, of course, very important. We need to know, if we do an X-ray, do we know, what do we do an X-ray of the extremity, 2-view, 3-view, chest, PA lateral, and so on. So ordering information. And then scheduling information, basically that we use it as a filter, like tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, right? From the RIS or the broker. So that's the information that's being retrieved. Patient demographic is then retrieved, and the images are tagged to this data. So why is it modality worklist so important? Because the information part of the worklist is filled in into the header. So now the header, with the images comes to the PACS, and then the PACS says, oh, I have a problem. So to be able to trace it all the way back, okay, what is the information? What just provide a problem? Oh, maybe the accession number is incorrectly encoded or not present or whatever, or the referring physician is missing. So you can trace it all the way back to the modality, not being able to copy that information from the worklist into the DICOM header that potentially downstream will create a problem. So sometimes you go all the way that as a PACS administrator, you come up with a broken study or unverified or something is in a lost and found file and say, okay, why did this happen? So to be able to trace it back to the header, to the worklist, and then ultimately, in many cases, to the mapping of the HL7 order. And sometimes it's actually a problem with the HL7 message itself. So all these different steps have to go back, and the modality worklist mapping in the provider is the critical part of that. Okay, so what are some of the matching criteria? Single value matching. So I can match in my query based on my accession number, right? So we used to have, in the early days from computerized radiography, digital radiography, we still had a lot of paper. And you probably see one of those orders that had a barcode on the bottom. You have a barcode reader and say, boom, and basically the system will use the accession number from the piece of paper to relate to the order. Now, of course, we don't have that much anymore. Most people are paperless by now, but that's a good example of a single value matching on an accession number or procedure number or a name, right? Single value matching, or of course the modality itself, right? So, but in many cases, we also use broad query keys, like give me everything for CT, give me everything for today, give me everything for whatever. So single value matching, broad query. These are the different ways we organize it. So let me talk a little bit about this information model that I talked earlier about, and that's very important because it gives there's one of the issues. I want to talk about issues a little bit. And so one of the issues comes in that if there's a mismatch on the information model, and it goes back to the information model. So what is the information model? That means that every order is identified, we call order image service request, right? In DICOM terminology, is identified by an accession number. So we have this accession number, I don't know, AB 2020, right? 1024 or number of DX number 1, whatever. So we have the accession number. You should be able, right? And most, depending a little bit on the modalities, but let's say we have a combo study for PET-CT. Right? The worklist should be able to identify 2 different procedures and should allow the technologist to pick either the CT or the PET procedure, because each one in the worklist should have its own unique study instance, unique identifier, study instance UID. And that's a critical part. So when we talk about all the different UIDs, unique identifiers, that are used to to identify these images. Of course, you have the sub-instance UID, which identifies the image itself or the object itself. The series instance UID, right? And so the image and the series instance UID are created by the modality. The study instance UID is created by the worklist provider. Except, of course, if the worklist provider is down, then the modality will do it himself. But normally, it will actually be created by the worklist provider. So we have a study instance UID. So sometimes, right, if you have a combo study, right, we need to have two different study instance UIDs, 1 and 2, for the different requested procedures. And they should be able to be able to select that as part of your work list. And then the technology will determine how many procedure steps it will do. And typically you do a different procedure step, maybe for a CT, it will be a scout view, and another procedure step will be without contrast, and another procedure step would be with contrast. There's a lot of steps that you could do with MRI, different pulse sequences. These are called procedure steps, right? Now, where's the tricky part come in is that if you have a PET CT, right, and if you, for whatever reason, would like the nuclear medicine radiologist to look at the PET images, and the, let's say, neuroradiologist to look at the head images, okay, we end up with 2 reports. Now, again, that might create a problem, because as soon as the first radiologist, right, send that report back to the information system might close it out and say, okay, sure, I fulfilled my job, I did my, I fulfilled the order, you're done. And then in a second report comes in, it might be rejected. So the complexity around combo studies is a little bit of an issue. So every hospital has a different workflow about it. If you do it right, the system should be able to recognize multiple reports for a SIIM accession number. Many systems don't, so they actually would identify maybe 2 different accession numbers, or a child parent accession number, or .A, .B. So combo studies are number 1 issue. Another issue is modality worklist timing. Modality worklist timing. And the reason is that the modality worklist is a query mechanism. So the client asks, oh, give me the worklist, so give me the latest and greatest. As soon as you request the latest and greatest worklist on your CT scanner, somebody might have come in and called front desk and said, okay, by the way, this patient canceled. So basically a second after you have a refresh, the worklist could be obsolete, so to speak. Could be not, because the reason is that the worklist, right, is not listening all the time. It's not updating it unless the technologist requests the worklist again. So one of the things we always tell the technologist, make sure before we get a new patient, refresh the worklist, right? Because the information might be obsolete. There's no real-time updates, right? So the 2 solutions, so you either can real-time update, could be slow, or we can set it in a polling mode. Bad idea in some cases. Why? Because if everybody's polling, what does mean polling? Every 10 minutes, or so every 10 seconds, update worklist, update worklist, update worklist. And I mentioned we have a big hospital and we have about 100 modalities, and it does all this polling all the time. The worklist provider might get a little bit overloaded, right? I've seen that happening as well. So probably better to just make sure that you tell the technologist, just do a refresh before you get the patient, right? So timing issues. Worklist update. So I have my worklist, and you do patient. When do we delete the image? When do we delete the patient from the worklist? That's another issue. A little bit challenging sometimes. Right? So we delete that patient, for example, from the worklist. Let's see, here's some example. When it is verified in the PACS or in the RIS. Now, that means a manual action by a technologist said, okay, the information is sent. I go to the PACS or the RIS, and basically I pull up the study and say, done. What is the impact? An HL7 trigger that would say order complete will then be sent to whoever wants to know about it, and including the modality worklist provider. They will know, oh, take it off the worklist. So that will be a manual verification. Right? sometimes some hospitals, and actually far too few in my opinion, use MPPS, Modality Perform Procedure Step, because if you switch it on, because I can guarantee you 99% of every modality has it, you only need to switch it on. If you switch it on, as soon as the technologist completed the study, it will be automatically be notified, right? So then the modality worklist provider can automatically take it off the list without the extra step, because sometimes the technology might forget, about it. So MPPS complete, cancel. But if you don't have either one of those, then there might be a timeout when it should be removed. Now, when do you not want to remove it? Right? So sometimes you want to make sure that the worklist entry is there for a longer time. For example, certain studies, ultrasound. Right? Ultrasound is a little bit tricky. You might be a bank of ultrasound units, and you do an exam, and you either have to drink something, or you have to go pee to make sure you empty the bladder, and then you come back, and then the ultrasound is taken, so you might want to go to another ultrasound. So we want to have that worklist entry available still, right? So on the ultrasound, we can then complete the study, for example. Nuclear medicine, sometimes we might need to leave that on the worklist if some of the nuclear medicine studies are done over several days. So you want to make sure that it stays on the worklist as well. So it depends a little bit on the modality. Yeah. So, but if we talk about a little bit about updates and deletings and timing, what are some of the other issues? Correct mapping from HL7 orders to DICOM. We don't want too little and don't want too many. So what is an example of when we have too many? So we go to a CT, and we have two CTs. One, let's say a little bit sophisticated, a little bit big hospital. Maybe we have, I'll make it a little complicated, 4 CTs, four different CTs. One in radiation therapy, oncology, one in outpatient, and 2 in inpatient. So when you call the worklist for CT, you don't want to see all 4. Right? But if you're in the inpatient, right, maybe you want to see the worklist for both inpatient CTs, because both inpatient CTs, maybe you might actually have them across from each other, and depending on which one is just available, we go to either 1 or 2, particularly in the cases of ER or whatever, right? So the first one is available, right? So that's an example of, we don't want too many and not too little, right? Because again, not too little, we want to make sure that actually both CTs, inpatient CTs, that we have all the information of anything that is with inpatient CT. So where there are multiple modalities, where there's multiple CTs, multiple MRIs, and there's a lot of different scenarios. There's an ultrasound that is on Fridays used for cardiology, for echo, and the rest of the week is used for radiology, right? How do we get the echo studies there on Friday? But there's multiple modalities. How do we do that? Very simple. There are 2 identifiers in the worklist that you can query for. And the first one is station name, and the other one is scheduled AE title. Most popular scheduled AE title, station name is not always used. So how do we know what station, right? What order goes to what particular station name or AE title? Well, we need to do some searching in the HL7 messages. For example, in HL7 messages in the order, there will be a patient visit segment that says this is an inpatient or this is an outpatient. So, and actually it's in segment PV1 if you know a little bit about HL7. Otherwise, you can actually see it right away. You see the HL7, you see the order message, right? PV1 line said, okay, the first one will be, first component in the PV1 segment says, inpatient. Oh, that needs to be mapped, right, to those 2 inpatient CTs. So if either one of the inpatient CTs with that particular schedule AE title is querying my CT worklist, I want to make sure it's there, shows up. I don't want to show it up at the outpatient or the oncology one. So map to location, not that hard. It's not that hard to do. Right? Use the correct modality. I see a lot of quite a bit of variations in there. For example, if you have a DEXA scanner, what is the modality? Maybe it's almost like another DICOM trivia. The modality for a DEXA scanner is actually BMD, bone mineral densitometry. Some people have CR. So if you have CR modality for the DEXA scanner, How do you make sure that only the DEXA scan modality worklist entries show up to the DEXA scan and not all of radiology, right? So make sure one of the things that you can do already is when you set up devices, use the correct modality. And some of the tricky ones are DEXA scans, use BMD. If you have a panoramic X-ray, don't use CR, use the one that is allocated to panoramic X-ray. This is PX. If I talk with some of these dental people, a minority of the hospitals using the PX. So they have to figure out, do we use DX, CR, sometimes there's really weird modalities as well. Same thing with if you have ophthalmology, for example, visible light, VL, instead of XC, external camera. So how do we know, for example, if you have a procedure, right, for radiology, and the procedure code says this is bone mineral densitometry, like a DEXA scan, based on the procedure code, I can map it to BMD. Right? If it is a dental procedure code, I can map it to PX. It's an ophthalmology, I map it to visible light. So use the correct modality. Right? And I map one procedure into multiple modalities sometimes. For example, if interventional radiology, right? Sometimes we want to make sure that we can show that shows up on the ultrasound and the fluoro work list. So you need to be able to do that as well. Right? And then some of the missing information. I talked earlier, said things like last menstrual date, weight, allergy. If the work list doesn't provide that, doesn't have that information in the work list, itself, most work lists fortunately have a patient comment field. So you go to the work list provider, find out the patient comment field or some study comment field, and then you take that information, whether it's weight or allergy, and you put it in the patient comment field. Now, don't use some other field that is supposed to be used for something else. Don't put it in accession or something. That is really bad, right? Use it in some of the comment fields. What about the incorrect encoding? So that's another issue that I came across. I actually had in a case where a new radiology information system with a modality worklist provider was installed, and there was an ultrasound, and the ultrasound from one of the top 3 companies, they didn't show up the work list, right? So it looked like they could make the connection, they can verify, we could ping, and the work list didn't show up. And what happened is that one of the attributes in the work list happened to be having the wrong value. So in the DICOM standard, there's a couple of required attributes that have certain codes that are required according to the tables that are defined in the DICOM standard. And in this case, it did not meet the one requirement, so was empty. So it took that vendor probably a week to figure out what was going on. They sent me the sniffer files. So how do we troubleshoot it? Well, validator and sniffers. You use a validator. I'll show it to you in a few minutes. So we do a validator, which is a simulator, first of all, to do a query, similar query. We can validate it using validation tools and using the sniffer to make sure that we can see exactly what's going on. So we could prove, yes, we do the query, yes, the result come back, everything looks great. The fact that it doesn't display it must be internal to the ultrasound unit. And then we said, is there something going on with that, with particular values? And then we used the random validator and found out, yeah, one of the values was not in a allowed list of values. And some of the, quite a few modality worklist providers do not schedule multiple procedure step for the combo study. So then we have to do a workaround. Accession number A, B, and so on, child, parent, and things like that. Some modalities do not allow querying multiple modality worklist SPPs. So if you schedule cardiology and radiology, and you use an ultrasound for both departments, or even another department, who knows what, right? How do we make sure that we get the worklist? So we need to be able to go to the worklist and pick worklist 1, pick worklist 2. What if you don't do that? Well, we might have to use some kind of what we call middleware, get some application that queries both worklists and that provides a single worklist back. Middleware providers will do that for you. So modality are limited in the date query. That's another issue that I've heard quite a bit. So a patient didn't show up, and then for some reason, they can only query for today's date, not for yesterday's date. I thought it was kind of a silly limitation, but some modalities don't allow you to do that. So the person that's still on yesterday's work list, they couldn't access that, right? So this is some of the modality worklist issues, and hopefully you can share some of your experience. Maybe some of them are not in this list. But let me show you a little bit about where would you go to find out what should be in the worklist. Well, every system, right, has a DICOM conformance statement. I use them, right? So you have a whatever, the Philips or the Siemens or whatever it is. You go to the conformance statement and you see exactly what is the information that you can expect. And there is an explanation like single value matching keys, right? See what's the single value matching keys, required keys, what are displayed, and what is mapped in the header. Very important to know that as well. So all of these X's are mapped into the DICOM header, right? Now, why do we have here schedule procedure step sequence? Remember, in the information model, we have multiple schedule procedure steps. So a sequence is nothing else than a spreadsheet, so to speak, where we have multiple columns. So these greater than signs mean sequence, meaning multiple columns can be filled in. So this particular device could allow scheduling on multiple steps, right? And here's my schedule AE title, right? That you can use to filter on. And here's my station name as well that I can use to filter on. Right? So this is the first page of this particular conformity. I think this is a Philips, I think. I just picked something arbitrarily. And then here again, so if you have a patient birth date, sex, size, group, and so on, if there's a attribute, right? For example, I don't know, allergy, pregnancy status, that is not provided in this work list, as it is not. So what do? Patient comments. So you can go to your provider, Modality Worklist provider, said, okay, let me map that in the patient comments, because this is a piece of essential information that is needed by the technologist. So this is the SCU, the query side. You need to map it, of course, with the SCP, with the provider side. Otherwise, I mean, I can ask for anything I want, but if it is not provided, then it will still be empty. But at least you know what can be expected. So one of the questions during the registration, one of the participants asked, so what are the tools that I use? So the tools that I use are as follows. We want to have a simulator for the Modality Worklist SCU. So you have a new device, and you can actually do that. If your new ultrasound is coming in, you can actually set up at your worklist provider already that particular schedule AE title, and you can actually take a simulator, Modality Worklist Simulator SCU, and before you even connect the ultrasound, you can actually test and check whether we can do a query. So the two queries that I always use is either DVTK, which is open source, or OTDICE, which is the simulator that I use in my training classes. We have a Modality Worklist SCP simulator, and I typically use either Conquest, and again, this is free. DVTK is free, open source, Conquest is free. And then Conquest is trivial to install, like literally within a minute, right? Very, 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 very easy to install. Or if you're a little bit more experienced, you might have a DCM4CHE. You can actually install a Docker on a server. A little bit more involved to install that one, but it's another. I like that DCM4CHE because it has an 8/7 interface. You can actually send an order, simulate an order, and query against it. So with these simulators, so the idea is you have let's say an ultrasound and a Modality Worklist provider. You want to be able to replace both the SCU and SCP with a simulator. So we can simulate either the queries from a different destination and can see what's going on, or the SCP, what's going on. And then we can connect the packet sniffer in the process, right? So let me see, very simple. Let me pull this up. So here's an example of that open source Conquest that I just talked about. So Conquest server, right? Very easy to install. So you can look at the configuration. So the Conquest has a V1, 11113. I can use a simulator to talk to it. DVTK looks like this. So this DVTK, again, open source validation tool. Very simple. You go to a simulate, see, Modality Worklist SCU session. It's yes, you right click on it, you said execute, and guess what happens, right? We just did a cfind. See? Associate request, sent, receive, validate, send, receive, validate, right? And so basically what I just saw on the server status is that my DVDK came in, simulator, right? So this is what a local connection. So let me now show a remote connection where we use a sniffer to capture the packets. So I have my simulator called OT-DICE. So clear all, right? So now I'm going to talk to a remote location. Let me make that a little bit smaller. Right, and in the meantime, I'm going to use my packet sniffer to look at the communication. Yeah. So on laptop, on LAN, I do an echo send. And then afterward, I do a query, configure my set up my query. I can set up whatever I want to query on. Okay. Execute my query. It worked. And then in my sniffer, I can capture exactly the communication back and forth. Remember, so first I have my verification. Here's my associate request from Herman to my conquest. Associate accepts. Remember step 1, she finds request. Right? I put in the data, and the data with my request that I issued, I can see exactly here. I did a request based on. Actually, I did an open request, accession number, patient ID, all empty, right? And here's some other ones. Oh, these are the attributes. I can see exactly what went into the request. See all the attributes. So multiple items right here. So this is my find request. And then I get my data coming back. See, this is Hilton, Paris Hilton. This is another person, pending, number, then a success. So everything, so this is the kind of tools that you want to use to simulate and capture packets. Okay, so this is a kind of conclusion. So there has been proliferation of modality worklist SCPs. That actually was one of the problems that why we have so many issues, because in the past we used to have only one big supplier modality worklist providers. There was Maitre, and there was more than later by Aqua. But in the meantime, almost every system, every PAC system, every RIS system, every EMR has now its own SCP, modality worklist provider. So there's a lot of, I would call, immature implementations there. So there's here quite a bit of issues. So there has been a lot of, particularly EMR started to provide them challenges. Sophisticated modality worklist mappings that are scalable, right? So you can go to a middleware company, said, I want to buy a modality worklist provider from so-and-so, and that is very flexible and exactly provides everything I need, instead of having to rely on a half-implemented EMR provider or an half-implemented RIS or PACS provider. So matching and filtering the modality worklist items kind of could be a little bit challenging. Yeah, most issues can be really resolved at the correct mapping at the modality worklist SCP. Go to the modality worklist SCP, talk to your vendor, and get trained on that. If your vendor says, well, I'll do the mapping for you, said, no, I'd like to know how you're doing it, because next time I can do it myself. Right? Get trained on that. It shouldn't be that hard. Work with the IT department to map the correct fields. You might want to look at 807 order messages yourself. If something might be there that would give a hint, maybe there's a department there. Maybe there's some other information in the 807 order that can be used to map to exactly what you need. Right? And set up your modality with the correct filter, of course. So you need to make sure you do the right mapping and then set the modality with the correct filter. Is the modality, the date, schedule A type, the station name, and whatever the modality is, it's OT, CR, DX, PX, right? Yeah. And so where does the DICOM web play role? There was actually a question. I said, well, what about DICOM web? Well, DICOM web is a way to access DICOM information through web services. And this is not necessarily, there is actually a worklist implementation for DICOM web. If you think about a web-based implementation, you really want to use that on a web-based device, for example, your phone or your tablet. So that's where you very easily can deploy these web-based interfaces. So if you want to do, and a CT scanner is just not necessarily connected to the web, and it does not really necessarily have a web-based interface. So the new DICOM web, I don't think it's going to play a role for the traditional modalities for a really while. But it might play a role is for the point-of-care ultrasounds, all the things that people wear in the pocket that connects to the phone or the tablet, where we want to get these general-purpose work lists. Okay, so question comments. I want to share with you two YouTube videos. And so this is the link to the YouTube videos, but you can just go to OTech YouTube because it tells you exactly how to use a modality worklist simulator. It tells you exactly how to use a Wireshark simulator, right? So instead of me spending another 15 minutes go for that, just go to the videos if you like to see those. Yeah. Okay, open for questions and contributions. I'm looking forward.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Herman. That was incredibly phenomenal. The first question we have is a little bit more general, but what do you perceive the value of the CIIP to be?
Oh, that's really a loaded question. What the value of the CIIP? So when you think about the value of the CIIP, the value of a certified imaging informatics professional. One of the things that was always a little bit frustrating to me, involved in certification for a while, and is that people were really not valuing as much. I had really good hope, and I think it was quite a few years back already in the state of Texas where I live, there actually was a bill being introduced. Unfortunately, it didn't make it, but there was a bill being introduced to say every healthcare worker has to be certified. Unfortunately, it didn't make it because if that would have been happening, then at that case, but it means every healthcare worker, not only a physician or a nurse or a technologist, but can you think about it? So you have this sophisticated device that's operated by a radiological technologist who is certified, sends images to the sophisticated device that is looked upon by a certified person who is a radiologist or a physician, and the people that manage that, they don't have to be certified. This is kind of really weird. So I always tell people, because what does certification do? And it's not just passing the exam. When I tell people when they go for the certification, it's not just passing the exam, but it is showing interest and really going the journey, right? Because if you are an IIP and you work in radiology, what do you know about cardiology, ophthalmology, about some of the other specialties? What do you know? And sometimes you work in a relatively small focus, right? So a certification gives you this broad perspective. So I personally think, if you ask me, of course, there's a value in certification. And that's why, and actually, if you think about, so I teach for a living, and I would say 60% of my students come to us because they said, Herman, I want to get certified. If they wouldn't be certified, certification, actually, I would, 60% of the people say, oh, okay, well, why do I need to learn this stuff, right? So that definitely has a value. Let me give you another example. So there's a company that I worked with, and the company came to me and said, Herman, we have have my service engineers, the CAO talked to me, said, I have these service engineers that are working and supporting these systems in the middle of nowhere, as a matter of fact, in Afghanistan. Right? We have a contract with the military. I want to have every service engineer that goes there in the middle of nowhere, is completely on their own. They have to be certified. Otherwise, I'm not going to send them out to be on their own. So I think that was just, perfect. So they're definitely very good requirements. And then the last thing, you get me on my soapbox, but I work with the Ministry of Health of one of the countries in the Middle East. And they said, every employee that works in an MOH hospital has to be certified. I wish we do that here in the United States. But, we don't, but that is okay. Hopefully there will be a culture. And actually, talk about culture, it's kind of interesting too. When I talk about my European, my background is European. So I go back to Holland every year to visit my relatives. And then occasionally I do training there. And Europeans, they say, okay, you don't worry about certification. So it's a culture, Asia culture, Middle East culture, African culture, Americas, all of the Americas, they value certification. Europeans, they don't, for whatever reason. I don't know. Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, next question.
Another individual is asking, are there any significant differences with systems using HL7 OMI versus ORU?
Oh, that's a really good question. Actually, the question it's not. Let me. I think they misspelled a little bit. So, what is OMI? OMI is an imaging order, right? So they probably want to say OMI and ORM. So you have an imaging order OMI or a ORM. It's a general order. So think about it. So we have an order form. Here's the difference. So we have an order form. You have a generic order form that could be used for laboratory, pathology, radiology, and da. Or you have an imaging order form. Yeah. So what would be the difference? Well, the imaging order form is more specific, right? So you could have specific information will be added to the OMI that is not in the ORM. Now, that information from the OMI information could be put in the ORM, but it's not always as obvious where it is. So OMI is I haven't seen a lot of OMIs, but I would recommend it for sure, because the more specific you are, the better off you are. But you could do your job with the ORM as well as with the OMI, but there's not so much different for that. And also, OMIs are not necessarily supported. Actually, very few. I actually have not seen a lot of systems that support OMI. This is not a bad deal. So actually, what I would do is say, let's make sure that everybody supports OMI. If you're Modality Worklist provider or some of the other systems, or your PACS that wants to see the orders does not support OMI, no big deal. You go to the interface engine and you tell your HL7 interface programmer, say that I want you to go map from OMI to ORM for those people that don't want to see the OMI, and so they can only talk to the ORM. So OMIs, I would recommend it, but be aware that not everybody supports it. And then in that case, you go to the HL7 engine and you do the conversion. Good question.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Does Wireshark support DICOM natively, or is that something that you've configured?
Wow, no, we have to configure that. Yeah, and it's actually very tricky. Well, no, not very tricky. I'll show you right away. So when you run Wireshark, you have to do two things. Okay. So first of all, if you go to Edit Preferences, and sorry, the font is a little bit small, well, hopefully you can see it. We go to Edit Preferences. So let me do that. So you go on top, Edit, all the way Preferences, and then here, Preferences, you go Protocols. See Protocols, and then we click on Protocols, and you will be surprised. Look at how many protocols I am in. I can probably know 2 or 3 of those. I mean, amazing how many protocols there are. So what you have to do, you have to assign DICOM. So you have to call the protocols, you say DICOM, DICOM, click on DICOM, and then you have to connect the port that you use, whether it's 104, 11112, whatever it is that you use, right? You have to put it in there. You saw that I have a spelling error there. So you have to do comma. So 104, 1112, 111, by the way, 1024 and 11112, make sure they always use these standard port numbers. These are the standard DICOM port numbers. Don't use 5, 6, 7, 8, 6001 or whatever, because, particularly with security, you want to have assigned port numbers to the devices that they belong to, so that you can monitor your port and you can control the ports and on your routers, because with the cybersecurity issues, it's a big deal. So use standard ports, 104, 11112, period, for DICOM. Anyway, so you have to connect it. So that's all you need to do. So you configure it. And then the only thing is what you do is you don't, if you switch, you set up the filter on the top being DICOM, right? Because if you don't do that, it's very, very, very hard. So let me talk a little bit about filters. This is kind of an interesting. So you can actually apply a filter. You can say protocol DICOM, DICOM. Okay? But the good news is, and I will tell you, it becomes green if you have the right protocol. But it's very powerful, the sniffer. So for example, now you see I'll go back and forth, see, because the filter is not working. I do enter, filter DICOM, it stops. But see, the thing is, the filter is very powerful, because when you look at a sniffer file, so let's say we have a problem between a modality and a worklist provider, and that is random. Once in the morning it happens. So you say, capture me tell the IT, capture the whole packet. And by the way, sniffers, packet files are standardized. So it's a .cap file. So they can actually capture with the standard network management a tool that they have available, whether it's from HP, Cisco, whatever it is. So it's okay, email me this capture file, you load it up, but then you have this, I don't know, thousands or hundreds of different transactions. How do you filter even if you filter on DICOM, you can hundreds of images, thousands of images were being sent. So you want to be very specific, you can actually set in your filter the IP source, an IP destination, and even the port numbers, right? Now, I'm not an expert on setting up all these filters. So in that case, I go to the DICOM, the Wireshark for Dummies book. You can go it on Amazon, and it tells you how to do this. Or you go maybe Google, maybe even how to set up a Wireshark filters. But in my case, I'm an old style guy. I like to go to my handbook and figure out how to do that. So use the filter correctly. So the answer to the question is yes. DICOM. So that's what Wireshark is all about. DICOM is built into Wireshark as a plugin. As long as you connect it to the right ports. If you have another sniffer, another packet sniffer, it very likely will not have DICOM in. So, but the capture files are generic. So you capture the one sniffer, move it over. You can actually file load, and then with Wireshark, you can do the analysis. Okay. Next questions.
All right, next question. We are trying to move our cardiology service from using orders-based workflow to using an encounters-based workflow.
Oh.
Do you have any suggestions for us or things that we should be cognizant of?
Yeah, encounter-based workflow is a very loaded term because encounter-based workflow says we don't have an order. And then, so what do you have, right? So if you have an encounter-based workflow, they have multiple options. So I can actually remember one of the presentations from the Mayo Clinic from Ken Persons, I think is his name, Ken Persons, yeah. He gave a very good presentation about encounter-based workflow. Actually, was in one of the SIIM presentations. You can probably go back and find it. Very good presentation. But he gave 5 options for encounter-based workflow. He said, okay, well, for ophthalmology, we do this. For cardiology, we do this. And so one of the options would be, okay, we take the images and we merge them later at the EMR because we create a dummy order. Another one would be, no, we create a worklist dummy, or another option would be, and so on and so on. I was looking at the different encounter-based imaging options and all the different permutations, and it came up with more than 100, right? So encounter-based workflow, it's a loaded term. I'm not sure what you want to do with the encounter-based workflow. Is it, and I'm just worried about it a little bit because there are so many different options in encounter-based workflow. There's really not a single one that came through yet. There's one defined by IIP for point-of-care ultrasound, right? And one for web-based image capture. Those are the 2 that are defined, but there's still many other options, right? Probably at least 10 or so, right? Well, maybe I would think a typical hospital might pick maybe 5, right? So I don't know which one you'd pick, but I actually wonder why you would want to do that. Well, oh yeah, I know why you want to do it because it's cardiology. So cardiology has a lot of unidentified patients. So they come in, and so they do first. You first stick a catheter in the person, and then we figure out who the person is. So that's a good example. But we call it actually a trauma case. Yeah. So yeah. Okay. Other questions?
Awesome. So you mentioned the PET/CT case. Can you talk through how that could also be stored as a single study with PET series and CT series, and perhaps population of the modalities in study field?
Very problematic, yeah. So first of all, PET-CT, the PET and the CT should have their own study identifier, right? If you look at the workflow, it could have the same accession number. So we have a PET and a CT. So we should have, you should really split the study. Now, splitting studies can be done sometimes at the modality, sometimes at the QA station. So hopefully, supposedly they have 2 separate study instance UIDs that are related to those 2 different studies. You could, if you want to, you could actually take a single study instance UID. I can't officially could do it, but you then naturally have the different series because modality like PT, PET and CT. And by the way, don't use PET, use PT, right? Some of the vendors use PET, which is not a DICOM standard term. And you confuse a lot, the heck out of a lot of systems again. So you use PT and CT. So you make sure that you have different series for that. Okay, next question.
All right, this is actually our last question. How often do you see a cardiology department and a radiology department running separate MWL servers versus a common MWL server and queried by department or system?
I think most of the time you see separate. Yeah, but that doesn't, if you, it really doesn't, that answer doesn't help you too much if you have your hospital, because in your hospital you might have the same. But the problem is more politics and policies, because cardiology is their own PACS administrator, their own budget. So, and it came, for example, with their cardiovascular information system, so they have their own broker, and so they might want to use it. If you have a hospital that is run more top down, and the IT department says everybody has to use the radiology modality worklist provider, and there's no reason not to, right? But then you need to make sure that the orders go to the radiology modality worklist provider. Make sure that you filter the echo ultrasounds from the radiology ultrasound, so that OBGYN doesn't show up on the cardiology and stuff like that. So you have to do a little bit more configuring, but I would recommend use a single one. Why would you use two different ones, right? It makes life complex. Use a single ordering system. And as a matter of fact, I think eventually, if you think about, having an EMR, Cerner, for example, or Epic, you can schedule it there. And then you have a single modality worklist provider anyway. You don't even have 8-7 messages going back and forth. Single interface modality worklist provider, depending on your departments, but it could actually be ophthalmology. You could schedule endoscopy, whatever it is. So, okay.
Awesome.
Well,
Thank you so much, Herman.
This is it, right? 2 minutes left. We have one more question? No?
No, well, it's actually a question for SIIM staff and for everyone who's been asking. Yes, this IIP tips and tricks session will award you with 1 SIIM IIP credit hour. Now, in order to claim that, once we end the call today, you should be directed to a SurveyMonkey link. You're going to want to make sure you fill out that information with your first, last name, and email address, and our staff will process that on the back end and begin awarding that. For those of you who asked for the recording of the session, it will be available in the coming weeks. And of course, if you have any difficulties, you can reach out to us at education@siim.org. Herman, as always, thank you so much. Wonderful seeing you today. And we hope that all of our attendees will join us again next month for the next IIP Tips and Tricks series.
Yeah, spread the word. Talk about it. Yeah, spread the word. So we get more people to contribute and ask questions. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.